The powerful bloc known as the BRIC nations have come a long way in the last decade. But as these economies face various challenges within their own economy against a backdrop of suppressed growth in Europe and a slow recovery in the US, are these economic powerhouses coming to the end of their economic surge? Joining me now to discuss the original acronym for BRICs, Brazil, Russia, India and China, is Tim Condon, Chief Economist for Asia at ING Bank in Singapore. Tim, first up, do you think the BRICs are beginning to lose steam?
I think there is a danger that growth has slowed permanently in some of these countries after the global financial crisis. Most clearly in the case of India and China. India's problems seem a little bit more intractable in the sense that it seems policy-induced. Monetary policy was very tight in the last couple of years, and that has really crimped growth. The authorities' ability to put together the kinds of structural reforms that might be needed to boost the supply side and offset that sort of cyclical headwind have not been forthcoming and appear politically very difficult. So there is the prospect that India and China, which were in the years before the global financial crisis 9 to 10% growth economies, have now become something considerably less.
What about other countries beyond the BRIC nations, like other smaller emerging economies? Also, Tim, do you think this economic partnership with the addition of South Africa actually has long-term viability?
Well, I'm skeptical of that there is it's easy to lump or group these disparate economies together beyond anything more than a sort of a soundbite or an attractive soundbite, I would say. But the growth pattern of the future will be that countries that are emerging markets that are and developed markets that are resource well endowed with natural resources, I think will experience a case of Dutch disease. Their traditional exporting activities will become less competitive as their exchange rates appreciate due to the proceeds of mineral and commodity exports. And these countries will grow rapidly, but they'll grow much less rapidly than the commodity importing emerging markets. And there I would put China, North Asia, so Korea, Taiwan, and much of Eastern Europe. I think these economies are commodity importing developing countries, and I think that they are positioned for very fast catch-up growth with the richest countries in the world. So I think that's probably, from my perspective, a better framework for thinking about what the world is going to look like over the next generation or so, taking that really long-term view.
How would you describe China's outlook? We like to use this term a hard landing, a soft landing, or as some economists have put it, a bumpy landing. How much worse should we expect to see Chinese economic activity and data go?
There has been a clear shift in the rhetoric from the top policymaking levels in China that is toward an emphasis on promoting growth. Now it's not quite as determined as it was in 2008, but it certainly is. They're no longer talking about the need to cool off the economy, and that's a positive. So I suspect we will see continued kind of what are called fine-tuning measures implemented by the authorities aimed at boosting growth, and that. So with that in mind, my baseline scenario is that China's growth is going to accelerate over the second half of the year. That we're probably seeing the slowest period right now, and then we'll pick up a little bit in the second half of the year, and for the full year growth coming in around 8%, which is quite a good number for a year in which the global economy is experiencing such stress. So I think you would have to call my scenario a soft landing for China. The authorities have this is definitely a year that is testing their vaunted fine-tuning skills, but I think that those skills will come through in the end.
What about Brazil and its challenges not only to achieve substantial growth, but its battle with its overvalued currency and its reliance on commodities?
A tough year, I think, for Brazil, and that's showing up in the stock market. I think the message there is this is going to be a year of adjustment in Brazil. You've got the double whammy of the over dependence on commodities in a year in which commodity prices are doing poorly. You've got structural problems, high interest rates, and slow non-commodity economy growth. So I think this is a year in which some of that Brazil story is a little bit tarnished, and I think this will be hopefully a year of adjustment and the implementation of the kind of supply side reforms that both Brazil needs and India needs to put these economies on a more solid growth footing and more resilient to the kinds of shocks that we're seeing this year.
If we take a quick look at Russia, we saw impressive growth in the first quarter of 4.9% on the year. In your opinion, Tim, what are some of the biggest threats that could derail a continuation of this kind of growth for the remainder of the year?
The main threat is obviously from something happening from the outside. That you have a good domestic demand story in Russia, and that I think will be resilient in the event Russia gets hit by a global downturn. If we have a spiraling situation in the Eurozone, that obviously would not bypass Russia, and I think domestic spending would be hit in that instance. But Russia stands to be in a pretty good position in terms of supported by a solid domestic demand theme.
Tim, thank you very much for your opinion on the matter. Now, I'm afraid that's all we have time for at the moment, but we have plenty more coming up on Dukascopy TV, including a brand new edition of Targets in Focus and a closer look at the Eurozone. Goodbye for now.